Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. This story still gives me chills whenever I remember it. I was just a child when it happened, only 7 years old. It was around this age when my childhood memories started becoming more vivid and clear. I have only one sibling, my older sister Emma. She's 2 years older than me, so at the time, she was 9 and I was 7. My parents had established a strict bedtime routine for us. By 9 o'clock, I had to be in bed with the lights out. If I disobeyed, or if my mom caught us awake after our designated bedtime, we'd be in serious trouble. My mother was particularly strict with us when we were young, especially about sleep schedules during the school year. I don't clearly remember if it was a school night or not. What I do remember is waking up in the middle of the night. Emma was shaking me, trying to wake me up. Emma and I shared a large bedroom in the attic of our old New England farmhouse. Our parents' bedroom was on the second floor, with the kitchen and living room on the first. Our house was over 100 years old, with creaking floorboards and drafty windows that whistled when the wind blew hard. I was confused about why Emma was waking me until she whispered for me to be quiet and listen. I strained my ears and heard exactly what she was talking about. It was our father's voice calling us from downstairs. But his voice was unusually soft, almost a whisper. I was already preparing to get up and go see what Dad wanted, but Emma grabbed my arm to stop me. She said she wasn't sure it was really our father. I told her to stop scaring me and remember feeling annoyed with her. She asked me to come closer to the door and listen more carefully. I got up and walked toward our bedroom door. Just beyond it was a narrow hallway that led to a small bathroom and another room where our cousins would sleep when they visited. To the right, immediately past our door, began the steep, narrow staircase that led down to the second floor. There was also a small door next to the stairs that led to some storage space under the eaves. I pressed my ear against our bedroom door and heard the voice more clearly. "Emma Daniel," it called, sounding exactly like our father's voice. I told Emma it was definitely him, but she insisted it wasn't Dad. Somehow, even at 7 years old, being the younger sibling, I felt confident enough to open our bedroom door and listen at the top of the stairs. But as soon as I approached, the voice suddenly stopped. I whispered to Emma that Dad must have gone back to bed, but she shook her head firmly and said, "That wasn't Dad." I told her to be quiet and stop trying to frighten me. Looking back now, I realize how brave or foolish I was. I unlocked the door to the stairwell and carefully opened it, trying not to make any noise. When the door opened just enough, I peered through the crack, and there, at the very bottom of the stairs, I clearly saw the silhouette of a person. It was a man, but it immediately became clear this was not our father. Whoever it was, he saw me, because he said, in a voice that started like my father's, but then shifted into something else entirely, "Hey buddy, come on down here." I slammed the door shut and locked it immediately. I ran back to our room and locked that door too. I started crying and Emma said, "I told you so." We decided to start screaming as loudly as possible on the count of 3 to wake our parents. So on three, we began stomping on the floor and screaming with all our might. It didn't take long. Our parents rushed up the stairs and started knocking on our locked door. At first, my mother was angry about the locked doors, but as soon as they came in, they saw that I was crying and that we were genuinely terrified. They listened to our story, and my mom became especially concerned after we told her that Dad hadn't been at the bottom of the stairs calling our names. She asked what the man looked like, but all we could say was that we couldn't see him clearly in the darkness. Meanwhile, I remember my father grabbing the baseball bat he kept in their bedroom and rushing downstairs, obviously looking for the intruder. After some time, Mom came back up and tucked us in again. I'm almost certain she told us to keep our door locked. This was the first time she'd ever said that. I was too young to fully understand, but it seemed that our parents definitely knew who this might have been. Emma and I looked out our small attic window when, after some time, we heard sirens and saw police cars pulling up to our house. We wanted to go downstairs, but stayed put. I remember how we begged our parents to tell us who the man was and what had happened, but they always said they didn't know. They also told us they were proud of us for not going downstairs. Personally, I think they knew who it was, but to protect us from fear or trauma, they never told us anything. 3 months later, we moved to a different town. My parents said it was because Dad got a new job, but Emma and I always suspected it was because of what happened that night. Years later, when I was in college, I brought it up during Thanksgiving dinner. My father exchanged a look with my mother before telling me that a convicted felon had escaped from the county jail that night. They hadn't wanted to frighten us at the time, but the man had been stalking several families in our neighborhood for weeks before his arrest, learning their routines and even children's names by watching them from the woods that bordered our property. What still haunts me to this day is how he managed to get inside our house without triggering the alarm system, and how perfectly he could mimic my father's voice. But what scares me even more is what my mother finally admitted after all these years. When they searched the house that night, they found pictures of Emma and me sleeping, taken from inside our room, dated from weeks before that night. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, wondering what might have happened if I had opened that door a little wider, or worse, if I had actually gone downstairs. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. It happened during my sophomore year of high school. I was 16, without a car or a license, so I depended on my dad for rides or walked if places weren't too far. It was a Friday night in late October, and my friend Amber was hosting a small get-together at her lakeside cabin since her parents were away for the weekend. Dad dropped me off around 7 that evening. The cabin was only about a 3-minute drive from our house, but walking would take closer to 25 minutes, especially in the dark. My dad had been divorced for almost 2 years by then, and had recently started dating again. When he dropped me off, he mentioned that he had plans that night too. If it gets late and you need to head home, you'll have to walk or catch a ride with someone, he said. I might not be able to pick you up. I knew that meant he had a date, but I didn't mind. I was happy He was finally getting out again. 5 of us gathered in Amber's cabin. Me, Amber, Casey, Madison, and Olivia. We were hanging out on the back deck overlooking the lake, sharing stories and laughing about school drama when, without warning, the sliding glass door opened and 4 guys from our school walked out. Among them was Drew, someone I had serious history with and absolutely did not want to see. I shot Amber a look that could kill. She hadn't warned me she'd invited them, especially Drew. She later admitted she thought she was being clever, trying to get us to reconcile after what happened last summer. I was furious. The situation immediately became awkward, with tension you could cut with a knife. 4 guys and 5 girls, including me. As the night wore on, I realized I had no interest in being part of whatever Amber was trying to orchestrate. By 10:30, I decided to leave. I'm certain the gathering broke up shortly after I left, as it was getting late. But I couldn't stand being around Drew for another minute. While walking home, I texted Amber to express my annoyance at her ambush. She kept apologizing and begging me to come back, promising Drew would behave. I forgave her eventually, but still wanted the comfort of my own space. I had been walking for maybe 6 or 7 minutes when I first noticed something off. The path from Amber's cabin led through a wooded area before connecting with the main road in our neighborhood. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, not echoes of my own, but a separate rhythm. When I stopped moving, the steps continued for a moment before also stopping. Turning around, I saw a man in his 40s, wearing a dark hoodie pulled up despite the mild evening. He was smiling at me in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "Hey there, nice night, isn't it?" he said casually. I responded with a tight yeah and kept walking. Our neighborhood was generally safe, with people often taking evening walks around the lake, so I didn't want to overreact. But something felt wrong. Another 5 minutes passed, and each time I glanced back, the man was still there, keeping the same distance, maybe getting slightly closer each time. The route home wasn't straight. I needed to make several turns through the neighborhood. At every turn, he was still there. I was texting my friends about the situation when the man suddenly spoke again. "Beautiful night for a walk by the lake, isn't it? I love this kind of weather." I mumbled sure and picked up my pace, not so much that it would look like I was running, but enough to create some distance. He spoke again, each word making my heart beat faster. "You live around here, right?" "Near the boat docks?" he asked. I lied with a quick no, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the quiet street. I started desperately texting my friends, begging someone to come get me. Ironically, Drew responded first, saying he was already on his way. Then the man said something that made my blood freeze. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. You live in that blue house past the community center, don't you? The one with the pine trees out front." He had described my house exactly. I spun around and he stopped immediately, still smiling. But now his smile looked different, predatory and cold. I shouted, "Stay away from me," and took off running. I heard his footsteps quicken behind me. In that moment, I knew this was potentially life or death. I started screaming as loudly as I could, "Help! Somebody help me," hoping neighbors would hear. He finally revealed his true nature and yelled back, "Shut up, you stupid bitch." My screams must have scared him because he clearly didn't want witnesses. Lights came on in several houses, and an elderly couple emerged from one nearby. The man disappeared into the darkness between houses. I explained to the couple what had happened, and they let me wait with them on their porch until Drew arrived. Drew drove me home, the trip taking barely 2 minutes by car. When we arrived, my dad wasn't home yet, still out on his date and not responding to my texts. I didn't want to be alone, so I asked Drew to stay the night. I could tell he was pleased by this request, but it wasn't about reconciliation. We stayed up late, awkwardly talking through some of our past issues, when we both heard footsteps outside the house. My bedroom was on the second floor, facing the backyard. We heard the gate to our wooden fence creak open, something my dad never used, as he always came in through the front door. I resisted the urge to call out Dad, and instead, Drew and I stood by the window, trying to see something in the darkness. We heard nothing for a minute, then a man's voice called out, "I can see you two up there." I gasped and stepped away from the window. Drew shouted something like, "We're calling the cops, you psycho," which is exactly what we did. What terrified me most was that this man knew where I lived, probably who I was, and possibly even knew I had been at Amber's. Drew talked to the police for most of the call, while I tried to calm my racing heart. Despite our problems, I was grateful he was there. When the police arrived 15 minutes later, I felt an enormous wave of relief. Just describing the man felt like doing something proactive. My dad returned shortly after that, looking more frightened than I'd ever seen him. The police cruiser remained parked on our street for several hours, presumably to prevent the man from returning. After that night, I never walked alone after dark again. I became afraid even to go into our backyard. My dad hired a security company to install cameras around the house within the week. They didn't try to hide them. The cameras were deliberately visible to deter the stalker or anyone else suspicious. 3 months later, we moved across town to a gated community where my dad felt I would be safer. We never discovered who the man was, but sometimes I still wake up in the night thinking I hear footsteps outside my window. The police suggested he might have been watching me for weeks before that night, learning my routines and where I lived. That thought haunts me more than the actual encounter. What started as an awkward evening with an ex unexpectedly became the night that changed how I perceive safety forever. And though Drew and I never got back together, that night formed a bond between us that remains to this day, 5 years later. He's still the first person I call when I feel unsafe. It happened during the summer, after my sophomore year of high school. I was 16 and had landed a job at this quaint little bookstore cafe on the edge of our small coastal town. The Lighthouse Reader, as it was called, was this charming 2-story establishment with creaky wooden floors and the perpetual scent of old books and fresh coffee. The cafe section only had 5 or 6 tables tucked between towering bookshelves, but it stayed open until 11 at night during the summer tourist season. I'd been working there for about 3 months, mostly closing shifts on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. By then, I knew almost all the regulars: the night owl college students from the community college, the insomniacs who preferred reading to sleeping, and the occasional late-night tourists looking for a quiet escape from their vacation rentals. The bookstore itself was bigger than the cafe, with winding aisles and secluded reading nooks, which made it difficult to keep track of everyone, especially when I was working alone during closing time. Being an old converted Victorian house, it had these strange blind spots and alcoves where people could easily disappear from view. One of our regulars was this man named Marcus. He always came in around 9:30, ordered a medium chai tea with almond milk, and would settle at the table near the window overlooking the harbor. He'd open his sleek silver laptop and work for about 45 minutes before leaving. Sometimes we'd chat briefly, and he'd mention how he worked the night shift at the research facility up the coast and needed his caffeine fix before clocking in. Our conversations never went too deep because I made sure to keep things professional. Even though Marcus was polite and well-dressed, something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way his eyes would linger a second too long when I handed him his drink, or how he'd ask just enough personal questions to seem friendly without being outright inappropriate. One foggy evening in late July, when the marine layer had rolled in thick and heavy, Marcus came in for his usual order. As I handed him his chai, he leaned in slightly and said, "You look absolutely radiant tonight, Emma. That blue in your hair really brings out your eyes." I thanked him with a practiced smile, but internally, alarm bells were ringing. I had only dyed the blue streak in my hair 2 days ago, on my day off. How did he know about it already? I was the only one closing that night, and being alone in the dimly lit store with him suddenly felt suffocating. He left shortly after that comment, but the next morning I asked my coworker Jess if she knew who Marcus was. She worked the closing shifts on the days I wasn't there, and I described him in detail. The precisely trimmed salt and pepper beard, the tortoiseshell glasses, the expensive-looking watch. "Doesn't ring any bells," she said, frowning. "And I close every night except when you're here." That's when I realized Marcus had told me he came in every night before work, but apparently he only showed up on my shifts. Jess closed at 10, an hour earlier than I did, and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he just preferred my chai-making skills, or perhaps his work schedule had recently changed. 3 nights later, I was in the back room organizing a shipment of new releases when I heard the bell above the door jingle. The store was empty, except for an elderly couple browsing the mystery section, and it was almost 10. I took a deep breath and prepared myself to act normal. But just as I stepped toward the doorway leading to the main floor, the supply room door suddenly swung open. I froze in place, my heart hammering against my ribs. Marcus stood there, his hand still on the doorknob, an unsettling smile on his face. "Just wanted to make sure you were all right back here," he said softly. "It's getting dark out, and I noticed you've been in here for a while." Then he backed away, letting the door swing shut. That door was behind the counter area, meaning he'd come into the employees-only space specifically to check on me. The elderly couple must have left without my noticing, because when I shakily made my way to the front, the store was completely empty except for Marcus, who was now seated at his usual table. While I prepared his chai, I could feel his eyes tracking my every movement across the room. My hands trembled slightly as I poured the steaming liquid, and when I brought it over, his gaze never left my face. "Thank you, Emma," he said, emphasizing my name in a way that made my skin crawl. You always make it perfectly." He then pulled out his laptop and began typing, but unlike his usual routine, 10:30 came and went, and he showed no signs of leaving. At 10:50, he was still there, occasionally glancing up at me with that same unnerving smile. The fog outside had thickened, pressing against the windows like ghostly hands, and the string lights we had hanging around the cafe cast eerie shadows across the empty tables. By 11:15, 15 minutes after our official closing time, I finally gathered the courage to approach him. "I'm sorry, but we're closed now, and I need to lock up." "Of course," he replied, closing his laptop with deliberate slowness. But instead of leaving, he stood and waited, watching me as I turned off the cafe equipment and dimmed the lights. It became clear he was expecting to walk out with me. My pulse racing, I pretended I had forgotten something. "Oh, I need to finish some inventory in the back. You can head out, I'll lock up in a minute." "I don't mind waiting," he insisted, his tone pleasant but firm. "It's not safe for someone like you to be alone this late. I'll wait and walk you to your car." "That's really not necessary," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My boyfriend is actually on his way to pick me up." This was a lie. I didn't have a boyfriend, and I always drove myself home in my beat-up Honda Civic, but I needed some excuse. Marcus's expression changed subtly, a flicker of something cold passing through his eyes. "Is that so? I've never seen anyone waiting for you before." The implication that he had been watching me after hours sent ice through my veins. I forced a laugh. "Yeah, it's a new thing. Actually, he just texted that he's around the corner. You should go ahead." Reluctantly, he gathered his things and headed toward the door. I maintained what I hoped was a casual demeanor as I followed him, keeping the counter between us. As he stepped outside, I quickly locked the door behind him, watching through the glass as he stood there for a long moment before finally walking toward the parking lot. I waited, heart pounding, for 20 minutes after he left, using the time to text my dad that I was running late and to expect me soon. When I finally ventured out to my car, the parking lot was empty except for my Civic, which should have been reassuring. But as I drove home through the foggy streets, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Headlights that turned when I turned, slowed when I slowed. Panic rising, I took a series of random turns through the beachside neighborhoods, watching as the vehicle continued to follow my pattern exactly. It was a dark sedan with distinctive LED headlights, and I was now certain it was Marcus. Instead of heading home, I called the police on my car's Bluetooth, explaining the situation and describing the vehicle. "Keep driving in populated areas," the dispatcher instructed. "We're sending an officer to intercept you. Can you make your way toward Main Street?" I confirmed that I could and continued my erratic driving pattern, making sure to stay on well-lit streets. After about 5 minutes, the sedan suddenly broke off its pursuit and turned down a side street. Relief flooded through me, but I continued driving aimlessly for another 15 minutes before finally feeling safe enough to head home. When I turned onto my street, my blood froze. Parked halfway down the block was the same dark sedan, and what terrified me most was that it was parked directly across from my house. A police cruiser was already there, lights flashing, and 2 officers were speaking with Marcus, who was gesturing animatedly. As I pulled up behind the police car, one of the officers approached my window. "Are you Emma Sullivan?" he asked, and when I nodded, he continued, "We received your call about a suspicious vehicle following you. This gentleman claims he was just driving home and happened to be going the same direction." "That's not true," I said, my voice shaking. "He comes to my workplace only on nights when I'm closing alone. He's never there when my coworkers close earlier. And how does he know where I live? I've never told him." The officer's expression grew serious as he looked back at Marcus, who was now watching us intently. "Wait here," he instructed me before returning to his partner. I couldn't hear their conversation, but moments later, they were asking Marcus to step out of his vehicle. As they searched his car, one of the officers suddenly called the other over. From where I sat, I could see them examining something they'd found in his trunk. Later, I learned that they had discovered a duffel bag containing duct tape, zip ties, a hunting knife, and several printed photos of me. Photos taken outside my house, at the grocery store, even walking my dog in the park. There was also a detailed journal documenting my movements for the past 2 months. The officer who had spoken to me first came back, his face grim. "You were right to call us Emma. This man has been stalking you, and we found evidence suggesting he had very dangerous intentions tonight. It turns out Marcus wasn't even his real name, and he didn't work at any research facility. He had a record of similar behavior in another state, and had moved to our town specifically after seeing my photo on the bookstore's social media page. Sometimes I still get chills thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't noticed the patterns in his behavior, or if I hadn't called the police that night. The bookstore installed a better security system after that, and I never close alone anymore. But occasionally, when the fog rolls in thick off the harbor, and I'm driving home late at night, I still check my rearview mirror, still take an extra turn or two, just to be sure no one is following me into the darkness. I work an unconventional shift at my job, starting at midnight and finishing around 8 in the morning. When I get off work, I head straight home and immediately sleep for my 8 hours. I usually wake up around 4 in the afternoon and stay awake until my next shift. I genuinely prefer being a night owl. There's something about the stillness of those late hours that's always appealed to me. It was a typical workday in late September, and I had just gotten home and fallen asleep around 8:30 in the morning. I woke up, made some food, and took care of a few chores around my apartment. Around 9 in the evening, I decided to take a walk before work, something I did most days to clear my head and make sure I wouldn't get drowsy during my shift. My neighborhood in northern Massachusetts has always been peaceful and quiet at this time, which is why I enjoy being awake during these hours. Sometimes it feels like the entire world belongs only to me, with the autumn leaves crunching beneath my feet and the distant sound of the interstate barely audible. I turned onto a small path that ran through a protected wooded area maintained by my neighborhood association. The trail was dimly lit by old-fashioned street lamps that cast long shadows across the path. As I walked, I spotted a figure sitting on a bench further ahead. They were quite far away, maybe 2 or 3 minutes' walk from where I was, but as I got closer, they remained seated. I assumed it might be another night owl, or perhaps someone having relationship troubles, needing some alone time. But as I approached, I couldn't understand why they'd choose to sit in the near darkness when there were better lit areas nearby. When I passed by him, he looked at me and smiled, not a friendly smile, but one that seemed calculated to show he wasn't a threat. He just stared without saying a word. This didn't ease my anxiety, so I quickened my pace and planned to turn onto the next road, which was about a quarter-mile ahead. However, after a few seconds, another man appeared at the corner ahead and began walking in my direction. I glanced back quickly and saw that the man from the bench had also started moving toward me. My heart rate doubled instantly, and my mind raced trying to figure out what to do. I wasn't certain if this was a setup, but I definitely wasn't going to take any chances. I veered off into the woods, walking faster to lose sight of them. As soon as I left the path, I heard their footsteps accelerate. I darted deeper into the forest and stopped to catch my breath, pressing my back against the rough bark of an ancient oak tree. Looking back, I could make out the silhouettes of both men at the edge of the path, scanning the woods in my direction. The taller one had what looked like something in his hand. I couldn't tell if it was a phone or something else. This confirmed my suspicions that they were working together. I continued through the woods, my boots crunching on fallen leaves despite my attempts to move quietly. The forest was denser than I remembered, with tangles of underbrush catching at my jacket. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, I emerged in another section of the neighborhood, almost a mile from where I'd entered the woods. I made it safely home, locked every door and window, and eventually left for work through my garage. I didn't call the police immediately because I wasn't absolutely certain of their intentions. But the more I replayed those men standing at the edge of the woods, staring in my direction with calculated patience, the more convinced I became that something sinister had been planned. 3 days later, I finally reported the incident to the police. The officer seemed concerned, but admitted there wasn't much they could do without more information. Exactly 5 weeks after my encounter, a woman from my neighborhood disappeared during her evening jog. According to the local news, she vanished somewhere along that same wooded path. I don't know if it was those same men, or if there was any connection between these events. But I have this horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach that I was just minutes away from becoming another missing person statistic. I've always loved having my house to myself. There's a sense of freedom and independence I rarely felt when my roommates were home. I was 23 at the time, living in a 3-bedroom house with 2 roommates who both happened to be away for a weekend getaway. It was early February, with a light dusting of snow on the ground outside. I was alone for the entire weekend and sat on the couch scrolling through my phone when I heard a creaking sound. I froze and listened, but there was nothing more. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the old house settling in the cold. But not being used to being alone in such a large space made it difficult to shake off the strange feeling. I decided to distract myself by watching something on TV. I turned on a random true crime documentary in retrospect, probably not the best choice, and settled back on the couch. As I watched, I constantly felt like someone was standing behind me. I would quickly turn around each time, but no one was there. Just an empty living room with the television light casting eerie shadows on the walls. After about an hour, feeling increasingly uneasy, I decided I needed to check the house to prove to myself that I was safe. I paused the TV and climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. There was nothing unusual, just an empty hallway leading to the bedrooms. I entered each room, quickly surveying them, but nothing was disturbed, and there was nobody in any of them. I returned to the hallway and rubbed my eyes, feeling foolish for acting like a child frightened by nothing. I descended the stairs, and as I reached the bottom and turned toward the living room, I caught something moving in the hallway out of the corner of my eye. Looking again, I realized the front door was slightly ajar. My heart stopped, and I couldn't breathe as I stared at the door. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I had closed it properly earlier, but I certainly hadn't heard it open. I had no idea if someone was in the house, had already left, or where they might be. I remained still and silent as I moved toward the hallway, heading for the door. I stepped onto the porch, quickly looked around the front yard with its patchy snow, and closed the door, then locked it. Almost immediately, I heard a creaking sound from the other side of the house. It was a long creak, not like someone walking, but perhaps like someone shifting their weight while hiding. I went to the kitchen and stood at the edge of the room, seeing nothing. But as I stood there, I began to hear soft breathing. It was coming from behind the kitchen island. Someone was crouched there, hiding just a few steps away from me. I ran to the front door, dialing 911 as I sprinted down the driveway and into the street. When the police arrived, they found no one in the house, but it was evident someone had entered and moved through both the first and second floors. They found footprints on the upstairs carpet that matched ones in the kitchen, wet marks from snow-covered boots. The most terrifying part for me is that this person had entered while I was home and walked through the house, probably seeing me on the couch watching television. I don't know what their intentions were. Maybe just a burglar who didn't expect anyone to be home, or maybe something worse. But to this day, I constantly look over my shoulder when I'm alone. Every night when I walk to work now, I take a different route. I vary my schedule, carry pepper spray, and always let someone know where I am. I've learned that the quiet moments when you think you're completely alone might be exactly when you're being watched. When I was 22, I started renting the converted garage apartment attached to my parents' Victorian house in rural Maine. It was the perfect arrangement, saving money while finishing college, but still having some semblance of independence. The apartment had its own entrance and was separated from the main house by a single door that connected to the kitchen. Even though my parents frequently went on weekend trips to their lake cabin, I still felt like I never had true privacy before moving into this space. Now I could have friends over without the awkward parent interactions, or bring dates home without walking them through a gauntlet of family photos. One particularly frigid Friday night in December, my buddies Marcus and Tyler came over to hang out. We planned to watch the live stream of an indie rock festival while drinking some local craft beers I'd stashed in my parents' larger refrigerator. Since my folks were away for their 20th anniversary weekend in Vermont, we cranked the volume way up on my new speaker system, the bass thumping through the floorboards. My friends had driven over together in Tyler's pickup, but after several hours and too many IPAs, they both decided it would be safer to crash at my place. The sectional couch in my living room was massive, more than enough space for both of them to spread out comfortably. Around 3 in the morning, after hours of music, debates about which bands were overrated, and too many snack runs to the main kitchen, I finally bid them good night and retreated to my bedroom. I collapsed into bed, exhausted but content. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when something jarred me awake. The room was pitch black, and according to my phone, it was 4:30 in the morning. As I lay there, disoriented, I heard what had probably woken me: footsteps overhead, unmistakable creaks on the old wooden floors of the kitchen in the main house. My first sleep-addled thought was that Marcus or Tyler had ventured upstairs for water or a midnight snack. I closed my eyes, ready to drift off again, when another sound froze me in place. The doorknob to my bedroom was slowly turning. Someone was trying to open my door. Thankfully, I always locked it out of habit from my teenage years, when my younger siblings had no concept of personal boundaries. I lay completely still, wondering why one of my friends would be trying to come into my room at this hour. I was too exhausted to call out or deal with their drunken shenanigans, so I simply remained quiet, figuring they'd eventually give up and go back to sleep. The knob stopped jiggling after a few seconds, and I heard faint footsteps moving away. My strategy had worked, or so I thought. I soon drifted back into a heavy slumber. The next morning, I woke to find that Marcus had already left early, something about helping his dad with yard work. Tyler was still sprawled out on the couch, snoring softly into a throw pillow. When I opened the refrigerator door, the noise seemed to rouse him. He sat up groggily, rubbing his eyes and yawning. I casually asked if he'd tried to come into my room during the night, but he looked genuinely confused and said he'd been too drunk to even remember getting to the couch, let alone wandering around in the middle of the night. We walked to the local diner for greasy bacon and black coffee to cure our hangovers. After breakfast, Tyler headed home, and I spent the day running errands and meeting up with some classmates at the library to work on a group project. By the time I returned home that night, it was already past 11. I hadn't been drinking, but the day had been packed with activities, and I was completely drained. I microwaved some leftover pizza, took a hot shower, and climbed into bed. When I say climbed into bed, I mean I settled in with my laptop to watch an episode of whatever show I was binging at the time. About an hour later, I finally shut everything down and turned off the lights. The moment the room fell silent, I heard it, creaking floorboards and shuffling movements coming from directly above me, in the kitchen area of the main house. The sounds were unmistakably footsteps, much more distinct than the normal settling noises an old house makes. I went completely still, focusing all my attention on listening. The sound stopped for a moment, and the silence felt heavier than before. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. A deep sense of unease spread through my body. I sat up in bed, straining to hear anything else for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a couple of minutes. Eventually, I tried to rationalize the sounds. Old houses make noise. The heating system was probably just kicking on. The wind outside was particularly strong that night. But I had no idea how terribly wrong I was. My self-deception was shattered when I heard the doorknob to my bedroom turning again. My body reacted instantly. I sat bolt upright as if I'd been shocked with electricity. The knob turned for several seconds, just like the previous night, But this time there was an additional sound, a gentle but deliberate knock on the door. I didn't say a word. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and immediately started texting my family, Marcus, and Tyler. Deep down, I knew there was almost no chance it was any of them, but I desperately hoped one would reply, "Yeah, it's just me." My parents didn't answer their phones. They were probably asleep at the cabin, and they weren't due back until Monday afternoon. There was absolutely no way I was going to call out, "Who's there?" Silently, I slipped out of bed and positioned myself behind my dresser, clutching a heavy metal trophy from my high school baseball days, just in case whoever was outside managed to break through and come after me. I'm not exaggerating when I say I stood there motionless for at least 15 minutes, listening intently for any sound. But there were no more knocks or rattling doorknobs. Finally, I worked up the courage to call the police, whispering as quietly as possible while still being audible to the dispatcher. I stayed on the line while waiting for the police to arrive, not daring to leave my room. I asked the operator to tell the officers to approach the window of my bedroom when they arrived. When an officer finally tapped on my window, I immediately opened it. Thankfully, my bedroom was on the ground floor. I handed him the key to the side entrance, and within seconds, I heard the front door of my apartment being unlocked. Only then did I emerge from my bedroom to find two officers with flashlights drawn. We turned on all the lights and searched my apartment thoroughly. It wasn't very big, and there weren't many places to hide, so the search didn't take long. Next, we moved up to the main part of the house and checked each room. Then we proceeded to the second floor. I told the officers which room was which before they opened each door. When they entered my parents' master bedroom, I heard a commotion. After about 30 seconds of waiting in the hallway, I realized something was happening. I peered in and saw the officers shouting commands, ordering someone to come out from under my parents' four-poster bed. A chill ran through my entire body. The officers instructed me to go downstairs immediately. Several minutes later, I watched as they escorted a man down the stairs, tall, filthy, with a wild, unsettling appearance. He was wearing a stained hoodie and cargo pants that looked like they hadn't been washed in months. The officers asked if I knew this person. I instantly replied no. The look of pure hatred he gave me as they let him past is something I'll never forget. He appeared to be homeless and suffering from severe mental illness, or perhaps just genuinely dangerous in a way that's hard to articulate. When they finally removed him from the house, I could breathe again. The officers informed me that if my parents or I wanted to file a formal complaint, we should contact the station during regular hours. As soon as the police left, I started sending messages to everyone I knew, describing what had just happened. It was incredibly late, so almost no one responded immediately. I called my parents at dawn to explain everything. They were completely horrified, as anyone would be. However, since the man hadn't stolen anything and seemed to be just mentally disturbed, my parents decided not to press charges. They were more concerned about getting home and changing all the locks. Later, I couldn't stop obsessing over whether I had forgotten to lock the connecting door between my apartment and the main house that night when Marcus and Tyler were over. We had been distracted, loud music, constant conversation, multiple trips to get snacks from the main kitchen. But what terrifies me even more is the realization that this man may have been hiding in our house long before any of us were aware of his presence. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear the sound of a doorknob slowly turning. I've always cherished solitude. About 7 years ago, I purchased an old farmhouse nestled deep in the Montana wilderness, far from the chaos of city life. It's a spacious, isolated place, surrounded by dense pine forests that stretch well beyond the boundaries of my property. The nearest neighbor lives several miles away, and usually the only sounds I hear are the whisper of wind through the trees or the occasional call of an eagle soaring overhead. It's a tranquil place, and that's exactly how I like it. Fly fishing became my escape. I spend most days by the stream that runs just behind my property. It's the perfect place to disconnect from everything. No cell service, no internet, just the rhythmic flow of water over smooth stones. Loneliness doesn't bother me. In fact, I embrace it. The farmhouse features a wide wooden deck that overlooks the forest. Often, I sit there with a whiskey in hand, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, listening to the sounds of the wilderness coming alive at dusk. This was always my sanctuary, until recently. It all began about 3 weeks ago. I was sitting on the deck as usual, staring into the darkness, when I heard something, a distinct snapping sound somewhere in the distance. I didn't think much of it, probably just a moose or another woodland creature. The forest is teeming with life, and over the years, I've grown accustomed to various noises. But with each passing night, these sounds became more frequent. At first, just the cracking of branches or rustling of leaves, sounds I attributed to animals. But then one night, I heard something different, a sound like something scratching. It came from the side of the house, near the window of what used to be my late father's study. It was a light scratching, as if whatever was making it was trying not to be noticed. I stood up from my chair, my heart beating faster than normal. I waited, but nothing else happened. Must have been a raccoon, I thought. But still, an unsettling feeling lingered. I decided to go inside and double-check all the locks before sleeping. The next night, the sound returned. The scratching, but this time it was closer, right beneath the window of that same study. I froze, listening intently. My nerves were beginning to fray. I couldn't explain why, but something felt wrong. I approached the window, pulled back the curtains slightly to look outside. Moonlight illuminated the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. The air was still, and everything looked perfectly normal. No animals. No one. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Perhaps a branch rubbing against the window. Maybe the wind. I decided there was nothing to worry about and went to bed. But the following night, the noise came back. And this time, it wasn't just scratching. Now it sounded like a gentle tapping, as if someone was trying to get my attention. My heart leaped, and I jumped out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and tiptoed down the dark hallway toward the study. When I reached the window, I switched on the flashlight and directed the beam outside. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, just the same empty forest. but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something was off. The air around me seemed thicker, heavier. I returned to bed, but couldn't sleep. Every slight noise seemed too loud. Every creak of the floorboards like someone creeping through the house. What happened that night still haunts me. I stayed home, unable to sleep, listening. But eventually, exhausted, I dozed off. Nights continued, and the sounds didn't stop. I heard them every night. Always the same. Tapping, scratching, sometimes even a faint whisper that seemed to emanate from within the walls. I tried to ignore it, but it became increasingly difficult. One night, I decided to confront whatever it was. Maybe it's just an animal, I thought. Perhaps a raccoon or some other creature had found its way into my home. I took the shotgun from above the fireplace. Seemed like a reasonable precaution to have something at hand in case things got weird. I walked to the study and carefully opened the door. The air inside was heavy, as if the room hadn't been touched in years. I hadn't used it since my father passed away last winter. Shining my flashlight, I slowly examined everything, looked under the desk, behind the antique bookcase. Nothing. I stood still for a minute, feeling foolish. The room was as it always was, undisturbed. But as I was about to leave, I noticed something. The cabinet doors were slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving them like that. My stomach tightened. I slowly approached and opened the doors. Inside was empty, but when I illuminated the corner at the back, I saw something strange. A small leather-bound journal, wedged into the crack between the wall and the back of the cabinet. Dark, worn, it looked like my father's handwriting on the cover. My breath caught. I couldn't focus. My mind was racing. Had someone been in here? Had someone been going through my father's things? I ran out, my heart pounding wildly. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I couldn't stay in that house another second. I rushed outside, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The darkness of the forest seemed so thick, as if it were swallowing me. But I tried to push that feeling away. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe the isolation was finally getting to me. I spent the night on the couch, keeping the shotgun within reach. But that night there was nothing. No scratching, no tapping. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The next night, I decided to be brave. I would stay in my bed. I wouldn't let something drive me from my own home. But just as I was beginning to fall asleep, I heard the sound again. The same one, tapping on the window. Tap, tap, tap. I jumped out of bed, my heart leaping into my throat. I grabbed the flashlight and rushed to the study, not caring about the noise my footsteps made. This time, when I pulled back the curtain, I saw not just trees. I saw a silhouette. Someone was standing outside, by the window, almost invisible in the weak moonlight. My blood froze. I whirled around, my head spinning. Who was this person? What were they doing here? I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't deny it. Someone was standing outside my home and watching me. I rushed to my phone, hands trembling so violently I could barely dial the number. The operator answered, and I could hardly speak from fear. There's someone in my yard. I think they're still here, I whispered. I dictated my address, and the operator assured me they were sending a patrol immediately. I hung up, looking around. I needed to get out. I couldn't stay in this house. But just as I turned to grab my jacket, I heard a sound in the hallway. A slow creaking. Someone was moving through the house. I didn't hesitate. I ran to the back door, opened it, and dashed into the forest. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back. My lungs were burning when I reached the edge of the property and saw the flashing lights of police cruisers in the distance. I slowed down, my entire body shaking. I hid behind a tree, watching as the police entered the house with guns ready, searching the premises. But I didn't stay to find out what happened. I couldn't. I knew whoever was in my house, this wasn't over. I was no longer safe. From that moment, I never returned. I cooperated with the police to make sure they understood everything. I told them I was fine, just to avoid a large-scale search. The house still stands there, lonely in the forest. But that place no longer feels like home. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that tapping again. What's worse, the journal I found that night. When I finally gathered the courage to read it, I discovered my father's last entry, dated the day before he died. There's someone watching the house. I've seen them at night, standing by the trees. They've been getting closer. I think they want something. I think they're coming for me. I don't know who was in my house or what they wanted. But I know one thing, they were waiting for me. And they're still waiting. Sometimes I wonder if what happened to my father wasn't the heart attack we all believed it to be. And I wonder if I'm next. It happened when I was about 16. It was 2012, at the height of the economic crisis, when our small town in Montana was experiencing the worst of times. That night, my parents had gone to a charity event at the church to raise money for the local school, which was on the verge of closing. I stayed home alone with our old German shepherd, Max. It was nearly midnight, and the valley outside our window was submerged in a thick fog, turning our remote house into an island in a white sea. I was chatting with friends over video call and watching a documentary about paranormal phenomena. A bad idea, as it turned out later. Suddenly, while I was typing a message, Max started barking furiously in the hallway that led to the back porch. At first, I ignored him, thinking that perhaps my parents had returned early because of the fog. I waited to hear the sound of my father's pickup engine or the creak of the porch door. But nearly a minute of continuous barking passed, and there was no sound of doors. Just silence, occasionally broken by Max's growling. I sighed, put my laptop on the table, and went down the hallway to check what was happening. Max was standing in front of the glass porch doors, tense, with his fur raised along his back. He kept his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. A chill ran down my spine. Through the fog, I couldn't see further than 5 feet. The only thing I could make out was the dim reflection of our kitchen and my own face, which looked pale in the faint light. "Quiet, Max. There's nobody there," I whispered, but I didn't even believe my own words. I carefully approached the glass, trying to discern something in the white mist. I shined the flashlight from my smartphone, but it only created an eerie curtain of light dispersing into the fog. My parents' car wasn't visible, meaning they hadn't returned yet. I reassured myself that Max had probably just heard a coyote or a deer, wandering near our house. It wouldn't be the first time wildlife had come so close, especially on such foggy nights. I returned to my laptop, but I couldn't concentrate. Max had stopped barking, but continued to growl quietly, not moving away from the door. His behavior was strange. He was a well-trained dog and rarely showed concern without reason. During the next 10 minutes, I began to notice sounds around the house. First, it was a barely audible rustling near the side wall, as if someone was running their hand along the wooden siding. Then the sound of footsteps on the gravel path leading to the garage. Max reacted to each noise, stopping his growling, then starting again, turning his head from one side to another, as if tracking something that was moving around our house. I was about to check the front door when suddenly I heard a distinct sound. Someone slowly climbing the wooden stairs to the back porch. Step, creak, step, creak. Max rushed to the door, going wild with barking. I froze in place, feeling my heart pounding in my throat. "It's my parents," I said aloud, trying to calm myself. Just my parents coming home, but I knew that couldn't be true. Their car hadn't pulled up, and they would have entered through the front door, not the porch. I tiptoed to the phone in the kitchen and checked if there was a signal. There was, though weak, a single bar. I was about to call my parents when I heard someone carefully pressing on the porch door handle, checking if it would open. Max was beside himself, barking with such fury as I'd never heard before. I quietly retreated to my father's office, where the old hunting shotgun was kept. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely enter the code on the safe. Then I heard the most terrifying sound. The back door handle stopped moving, and instead there was a quiet metallic sound, as if someone was inserting something into the lock. I finally opened the safe, grabbed the shotgun, and with trembling hands loaded it and returned to the kitchen. Max was still standing in front of the door, but now, instead of barking, he was only growling quietly, pressed to the floor, ready to attack. I raised the phone to call emergency services, when suddenly the movement by the door stopped. Complete silence fell, and then I heard new sounds, now from the basement. Someone was trying to open the external doors that led to the lower part of the house, which could only be reached by going around the entire perimeter and down the steep slope behind the house. Max suddenly rushed to the door leading to the basement, running down the stairs with such growling that sent chills down my spine. This gentle dog, who never even barked at the mailman, now sounded like a wild beast. I heard him reach the bottom of the stairs and begin frantically scratching at the basement door that led outside. Then suddenly, everything went quiet. Max's growling stopped so abruptly, as if someone had cut a string. "Max," I called, my voice barely a whisper. "Silence." "Max," I called louder, feeling an uncontrollable fear taking over me. And then I heard it, a quiet whimper, filled with pain or fear. I couldn't tell. But it was distinct enough for me to understand. Something was happening downstairs, and Max was in danger. Adrenaline instantly filled my veins. I raised the shotgun, bypassed the kitchen table, and approached the basement door. My heart was beating so hard that I could barely hear my own thoughts. I opened the basement door and turned on the lights on the stairs. Our basement was old-fashioned, half buried into the hillside, with rough stone walls and two small windows high under the ceiling. "Max," I called again, trying to give my voice confidence that I didn't feel. I heard another whimper from the depths of the basement, where my father kept his tools. Holding the shotgun ready, I began to slowly descend the stairs, counting each step to calm myself. 1, 2, 3. The external basement door was covered with old peeling paint, with a small window at ground level. I could see the fog seeping under the gap at the bottom, creating an eerie effect in the dim light of the single bulb. 4, 5, 6. The external basement door was closed, but I couldn't see Max anywhere nearby. 7, 8. When I finally reached the bottom step, I heard a sound that froze the blood in my veins, a quiet shuffling behind the door, as if someone was slowly moving, making another attempt. "Who's there?" I shouted, holding the shotgun in front of me. "I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it." I tried to make my voice sound confident, like an action hero, but instead it sounded like a scared teenager, which I was. Max's whimper sounded again, this time from behind a pile of old boxes in the corner. I quickly glanced in that direction and saw him. He was standing, staring at the external door, his body tense as a string. Suddenly, the basement door handle began to turn slowly. My breath caught. I aimed the shotgun directly at the door, ready for the worst. And then, as if in slow motion, the door began to open. My first thought was to shoot, but something held me back. Maybe it was how slowly the door was opening. Not with a sharp push, as a burglar would do, but with a careful, almost uncertain movement. A flashlight beam filtered through the crack, and I heard a woman's voice. "Hello. Is anyone there?" I froze, not knowing what to do. It wasn't my mother's voice or anyone I could recognize. The door opened wider, and the silhouette of a woman with a flashlight in her hands appeared in the doorway. She was dressed in a black coat, her hair tied in a high ponytail. "Oh my God," she cried when she saw me with the shotgun. "Please don't shoot." I got lost in the fog. I didn't lower the weapon. "Who are you? What are you doing near our house?" The woman slowly raised her hands. "My name is Elizabeth. I was driving from Helena, but because of the fog, I went off the main road. My car got stuck in a ditch about half a mile from here. I was walking along the road looking for help when I saw the light from your house." Her story sounded plausible, but something about it troubled me. Why were you trying to get in through the basement instead of knocking on the front door? She smiled awkwardly. "I did knock at the front door, then I went around the house. Nobody answered, and here I saw that these doors looked like an entrance. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." Max continued to growl quietly from the corner, and that concerned me. He was usually friendly to everyone. "Listen," she said, taking a step forward. "I just need a phone to call a tow truck." "Please," I hesitated. Something didn't add up. If she had gone around the house, why had I heard footsteps in different places simultaneously? And why hadn't she rung the doorbell instead of trying to open various doors? But before I could decide what to do, I heard the most pleasant sound in my life, the rumble of my parents' pickup truck pulling up to the house. "My parents are back," I said, feeling enormous relief. "Let's go upstairs. They can help you better than I can." The woman hesitated, tensing strangely. "Ah, yes, of course," she said quietly. As we went upstairs, my parents were just coming in through the front door. Max rushed past us and jumped to my father, whimpering and wagging his tail, as if begging for protection. "What's going on?" my father asked, noticing the shotgun in my hands and the unfamiliar woman behind me. I started to explain the situation, but before I could finish, my mother interrupted me. "Elizabeth. Elizabeth Crane. What are you doing here?" I looked at my mother in surprise, then at the woman. She looked as surprised as I was. "You know me?" she asked uncertainly. My mother nodded, her face darkening. "Of course I know you. You're David Crane's sister. The same David who threatened my husband after he was fired from the sawmill 3 months ago." My father tensed, came closer, and stood between us. "What are you doing in my house near my son?" Elizabeth went pale, but quickly composed herself. I just got lost. Honestly, I didn't know this was your home. In such a small town," my father snorted. "Where's your car? And where's your brother?" "I'm alone," she said quickly. David knows nothing about this, but something in her voice betrayed the lie. My father resolutely took the phone and dialed the sheriff. The next half hour was tense. Sheriff Henderson arrived with a deputy and spent a few minutes talking to Elizabeth separately. Then they went around the entire perimeter of the house and did find her car, not in a ditch half a mile away, but neatly parked behind the hill in a shaded spot where it couldn't be seen from the road. And worst of all, in the car, they found her brother David, who was waiting with a full set of screwdrivers, crowbars, and other burglary tools. As it turned out later, David had been fired from my father's sawmill for theft. He had lost his house due to debts and blamed my father for everything. Their plan was for Elizabeth to distract us, while David sneaked inside through the basement and took back what belonged to him, as he later confessed. Fortunately, Max figured out their plan and prevented it from happening. The next morning, the sheriff brought an official report and said that the Crane siblings would spend some time in the county jail. We also learned that Elizabeth had previously worked at a psychiatric hospital and had access to medical records, including knowledge about my mother's anxiety disorder, which made her afraid to leave me home alone. That's why they chose that night, knowing that my parents would be at the charity event, and I would most likely be alone. My father and I installed an additional security system the following week, including perimeter cameras. But even with these precautions, I still jumped at every rustle in the night for a long time. And although I'm glad I found out who was behind that incident, one question still haunts me. What would have happened if Max hadn't detected them so quickly? What would have happened if my parents hadn't returned right then? And the most disturbing question, why was Elizabeth smiling when the sheriff led her out of our house, looking straight at me as if we would meet again? This happened 7 years ago, when I was living in a small coastal town in Oregon. As I write this now, I'm 26, but back then I had just turned 19. The moment I became legally an adult, I started looking for my own place. My relationship with my parents wasn't great at the time. I was a stubborn, arrogant teenager, and we fought constantly, especially with my father. I love them both dearly and understand they weren't perfect parents, just as I wasn't a perfect son. We all had our flaws. I'm grateful we've worked through our issues, and now our family relationship is much stronger. But for many years, things at home were tense. I admit a large portion of the blame rests on me, though certainly not all of it. None of my friends wanted to move out from their parents' homes yet, and I understood why. Most of them had good relationships with their families. They were all working, attending community college, and trying to save money. But me, I was desperate to get out as soon as possible. My parents constantly threatened to kick me out whenever they caught me smoking weed or drinking. But each time I packed my bags and left, they called the police and reported me as a runaway. Fortunately, I was never sent to juvenile detention, but I spent several nights in holding cells to teach me a lesson, as they said. But I never learned, and unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way through what happened next. I wasn't overconfident, just hot-headed and stubborn. Since I couldn't find anyone I knew who wanted to live with me, I decided to take a risk. I checked Craigslist hoping to find cheap housing. I came across a decent-looking, albeit small cottage that rented for just $875 a month. It seemed almost too good to be true for the Pacific Northwest, especially since it was just a 15-minute walk from the beach. I sensed something was off, but I was eager to learn all the details. So I decided to message her. When I called, the woman didn't answer, so I left a voicemail. Shortly after, I received a text with a time when I could come see the house and discuss everything in person. She wanted me to come that same evening, so I did. When I arrived, she showed me around, and at first glance, everything looked perfect. I was actually pretty excited about finally having a place to myself. The cottage had this rustic charm with wooden beams and a small fireplace. There was even a little garden out back, where she said I could grow vegetables if I wanted. But she didn't have me sign any paperwork. All she asked for was a small security deposit, which I had managed to scrape together from my part-time job at the local hardware store. She told me I could move in the very next day if I brought the money. The following morning, I drove to the cottage and met her to hand over the deposit. After that, she gave me the keys. I unloaded my pickup truck and left because I had a few other errands to run that day. I also needed to return to my parents' house to grab a few more things. When I returned to the new place, it was around 8:30 in the evening. As I approached the cottage, I noticed her car was still parked in the driveway. This immediately put me on edge and confused me. When I walked in, she was sitting in the living room on my couch watching TV. What the hell are you doing here, ma'am?" I asked, trying not to sound rude. But I was genuinely confused about what was happening. "Oh, I'll be staying here for a while until I find another place," she replied casually, not even looking away from the screen. I looked at her like she was insane. I was completely baffled. She had never once mentioned that we would be living together when I rented the place. The cottage was tiny, just a living room, kitchen, one bedroom, and a bathroom. There wasn't even a separate guest room. I asked how long she planned to stay, and she said just a few days. I was extremely uncomfortable, but I was so tired and drained that I decided to let it go and just went to my bedroom. The strange thing was, she had moved some of her clothes into the closet in my room. When I pointed this out, she simply said, "Oh, I've always kept my things in there." I fell asleep almost immediately after lying down, and that was my biggest mistake. This woman, who was essentially a stranger to me, truly frightened me. And now she was living in my new home. But I didn't know what choice I had. She was at least 65 years old, so I figured if she tried anything strange, I could easily defend myself. Plus, I locked my bedroom door, just in case something crossed her mind during the night. Approximately half an hour after falling asleep, I was awakened by music playing in the living room. I got out of bed and asked her to turn it down because I was trying to sleep. All I got in response was a vacant stare. She reduced the volume slightly, but didn't say a word. I noticed she was looking through old photo albums, and there were several candles lit around the room. I managed to fall back asleep, but what woke me up next was the most terrifying and frightening thing that had ever happened to me. There was knocking on my bedroom door. At first, very softly. "Excuse me, what do you need?" "I'm sleeping, ma'am." "Jamie, wake up," she said in a sing-song voice. "Dinner's almost ready. Don't make Mother angry." A cold chill ran down my spine after hearing those words. My name isn't Jamie, so I immediately realized something was seriously wrong with this woman. My actual name isn't even remotely similar. I was so shocked that I couldn't even respond. I just hoped she would go away and leave me alone. Less than a minute later, she began frantically pounding on the door with both fists while screaming, "Let me in right now. I swear to God, if you don't let me in, this will be the end of you, boy." I was afraid she might somehow manage to open the door, so I pushed my dresser across the room and blocked the door with it. Then I grabbed my phone, opened the bedroom window, jumped out, and ran straight to my pickup. I got behind the wheel and drove away. I didn't look back even once. As I sped away, I could see her in my rearview mirror, standing in the front yard in her nightgown, holding something in her hand that looked like a butcher knife. I drove straight to the police station and reported everything. What I didn't know then, but learned several weeks later, was that her son had disappeared 3 years earlier, and the police eventually found him dead. Her name was Alina, by the way, and she was the one charged with the murder of her own son. There was substantial evidence that she had poisoned him. His body was found buried in the backyard of that very cottage I had rented. Her son's name was Jamie. The police told me that she had rented out that cottage to 5 different young men over the past 3 years. 2 of them had gone missing. The cottage wasn't even hers to rent. She had broken in after the previous owners moved out, and the property was sitting vacant. I don't know what was wrong with her, but that woman was truly deranged. I still don't know if she genuinely thought I was her son, or if she was just trying to relive the same situation and wanted to kill me. It's hard to say. Or maybe she was so insane that she truly believed I was Jamie. Even now, as I tell this story, it all seems like some horrible nightmare. This woman was absolutely deranged, and I am 100% convinced. If I had eaten that dinner she prepared, I would have long been buried somewhere next to Jamie. The most disturbing part: the police later found a journal in the cottage where she had detailed plans for each of her sons. Apparently, she believed that if she could find the right Jamie, she could undo what she had done. Each entry ended the same way: not the right one. I'll try again. I still can't sleep with my bedroom door closed, and I triple-check every rental agreement now. It was Thursday, 3 o'clock in the morning, when I returned to our rented house on the outskirts of Arizona. Spring in the desert was always filled with scents: dry sandy wind, the breath of cacti. But what greeted me at the threshold? That was a different smell altogether. Heavy, sweetish, nauseating. It seeped through every crack and seemed to cling to my clothes. I tensed immediately. It was the same smell I once encountered in the pathology department during a college tour. A smell impossible to forget. I immediately headed to Jake's room, my roommate and friend since our military service. We had gone through Iraq together in the early 2000s, and when we returned home, we decided to live together for a while to make it easier to adapt to civilian life. Jake, I knocked on his door 3 times. "You okay in there?" Silence. Not a sound. Normally, Jake always responded, even if he was busy or asleep. He said that after the war, he lost the ability to sleep deeply, the slightest noise, and he was already on his feet. "Jake, I'm serious. Are you there?" I tried turning the doorknob locked. Strange, he rarely locked himself in. After a concussion in Baghdad, Jake was afraid of enclosed spaces. The smell grew stronger with each passing minute. I walked back to the living room and dialed his number. The phone went straight to voicemail. Then I tried 5 more times, same result. I sent about a dozen messages. They were marked as read, but no response. 3 hours passed. The smell became so unbearable that I couldn't even turn on the air conditioner, because then it would spread throughout the house. Before I continue, I must warn you. What you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. If you're easily affected by emotions or have a weak stomach, perhaps you should stop here. I wish I had never seen it myself. Long pause. The smell was becoming more and more unbearable with each minute. Something told me that the source was Jake's room. I sat in the kitchen, clutching my phone, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Maybe he just forgot to take out the trash, or left some leftovers. Perhaps something was brought in by his 2 cats, Martha and Washington. But deep down inside, I knew this was something much worse. Hours passed, and I couldn't stand it anymore. "Jake, if you're in there, I'm coming in. You hear me?" 3 seconds, and I'm breaking down your door. I waited. Silence. A Desert War veteran doesn't rely much on hairpins to unlock doors. I had a set of lock picks, a souvenir from Baghdad. I managed to open the lock in 15 seconds. When the door opened, I was hit by a wave of such stench that I barely kept my balance. Despite years of war and everything I'd seen, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. I covered my nose with my shirt and entered. The room looked surprisingly neat. The bed was made with military precision, the edges of the blanket neatly tucked under the mattress. On the desk, perfect order. Folders with documents in even stacks, pens in a glass. On the wall, photographs of our platoon. But the smell, it seemed to pulsate from the large built-in closet along the wall. I approached it, feeling cold shivers running down my spine. My heart rate accelerated. My breathing became shallow. Something inside me screamed, "Don't open it." Don't look, but I had to. The closet doors slid open with a muffled creak. Inside, at the bottom, lay a large black plastic garbage bag. Something resembling a paw was sticking out of it. In the dim light filtering through the blinds, I saw whitish larvae swarming around the bag. Horror gripped me when I realized there was a dead animal in there, already beginning to decompose. With trembling hands, I slightly opened the edge of the bag and instantly recoiled. Inside the bag was a dead Rottweiler. Its head was almost completely, I can't even say it, separated from the body, and all over the body, numerous signs of trauma and injuries. It was the neighbor's dog, Rex, a huge but good-natured Rottweiler that Jake always hated for its constant barking. "This dog drives me insane," he used to say. But from words to this, I rushed out of the room, nearly tripping over the threshold, and immediately called the police. The dispatcher tried to calm me down, but my story was so chaotic that they sent 3 patrol cars instead of 1. The police arrived in 12 minutes. The officers entered the room, and even them, people who had seen everything, were shocked by what was in the closet. "That's the Andersons' Rottweiler," confirmed one of the officers. "They reported him missing 3 weeks ago." They pulled out the bag and examined the contents. "You know, I always thought I was a strong man. I went through war. I saw death. But when they fully opened that bag, I vomited right onto the floor. Rex wasn't just killed, he was tortured to death. All 4 paws were broken. The fur on his back was partially removed. And his neck was cut with something blunt, not a knife, but as if with a saw. Do you have any idea where your roommate might be?" The lieutenant asked me when we exited the room. "No, the last time we spoke was last night. He said he was going to the Coyote Bar on the other side of town. Did you notice any signs of aggression toward animals before?" I thought about it. Jake had always been quiet, withdrawn after returning from Iraq. He was being treated for PTSD, taking medication. But killing an animal, he hated that dog, I admitted. Said its barking reminded him of explosions in Baghdad. But to kill it, I would never have thought, and then I remembered. "Damn," I whispered. "Last month, I saw him picking up some dead clothes. I thought they were old pants." The police officers exchanged glances. "Show us." I led them to the shed behind the house. There in the far corner, underneath old boxes, lay 3 bags. When the officers opened them, inside were remains of other animals, neighborhood cats that had disappeared over the past few months. The police issued a search warrant for Jake that same evening. They found his car in a parking lot near the Mexican border 2 days later. But Jake himself was nowhere to be found. He simply vanished. I immediately terminated the lease and moved to another city. Blocked all his contacts, deleted shared photos. I couldn't believe that my best friend, the person I went through war with, could turn out to be a monster. 2 years have passed. Jake still hasn't been found. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking, what if I hadn't opened that closet? What if he had returned and I knew nothing? Would a person capable of such cruelty to defenseless animals be just as merciless to humans? To me, I don't want to know the answer. And you know what's most frightening? That I never saw any signs of such cruelty in him. We shared a trench, ate from the same bowl, saved each other's lives. And not once did I notice the slightest hint of what was really hiding behind his eyes. I think that's the worst, realizing that all this time, someone completely different from who you thought could be living next to you. Someone with their own skeletons in the closet. Literally. I graduated from college in the winter of 2010. After 4 years of living in a dorm with 3 roommates, I was desperately craving my own space. For 2 years, I saved every cent from my job at an IT company to make this dream come true. The plan was simple: find a cozy 1-bedroom apartment in a historic Boston neighborhood, not far from the park where I loved to run every morning. 3 of my college friends were already living in this area, which seemed like the perfect coincidence. I'd be close to people I knew while still having my own space. The first subway station was a 5-minute walk away, as were the grocery store, coffee shop, and a small bookstore where I could spend hours flipping through science fiction novels. I had saved $15,000, had no debts, and even managed to buy a used Ford Focus that I paid for in full. Life seemed perfect. When my apartment application was approved, I felt a joy I hadn't experienced since childhood. My own space where no one would borrow my shampoo or eat the leftover pizza from the fridge. The first few days in the new apartment were pure bliss. I set up my small vinyl record collection in the living room, hung posters of my favorite sci-fi movies, and even bought myself a real plant, a succulent I named Spock. But my peace lasted only 9 days. 2 of my college friends, David and Marcus, lived in the same building on the 4th floor, while my apartment was on the 2nd. They stopped by for coffee a few times, reminiscing about college and discussing plans for the future. Everything was casual and pleasant, until they crossed the line. They started showing up unannounced, bringing beer, staying late. When one evening they stayed until 3 in the morning, even though I had to be up for work at 6, I hinted that I needed time for myself. "Sure, dude, we totally get it," said David, but there was something fake in his voice that made me wary. The next evening they appeared again, this time with several bags of takeout food and suitcases. "Listen, we've got a problem," Marcus began, not looking me in the eye. "We got evicted yesterday. Nothing serious, just a small dispute with the landlord about noise. Can we stay with you for a few days until we find a new place?" I froze. Part of me wanted to close the door in their faces, but another part, the one that remembered how we studied for exams together and helped each other, couldn't refuse. "1 week," I said firmly. "Maximum 1 week." 1 week turned into 2, then into a month. My small apartment started to resemble the dorm I had so desperately wanted to escape. They didn't clean up after themselves, invited people I didn't know, and worst of all, I noticed my things were disappearing. At first, small items, a phone charger, a few books, then my favorite watch that I had received as a gift from my grandfather. When I tried to talk to them about it, they always brushed it off. "You probably misplaced it yourself, dude. We didn't take anything." One morning I woke up to a strange smell. It was sweet, but with an unpleasant undertone, like something rotting. The smell was coming from the kitchen. Opening the refrigerator, I saw some strange jars with dark liquid. None of them had labels. "What is this?" I asked David when he finally woke up at noon. "Oh, that. Just homemade tincture," he shrugged. "We're testing a new recipe. Want to try some?" Something in his smile made me decline. That same evening, when they went to a bar, I decided to look through their things. I hate to admit it, but I needed to know what was going on. Under Marcus's bed, I found a box. Inside were documents, not theirs, but of people I didn't know. Driver's licenses, credit cards, even a few passports. And my grandfather's watch. Cold fear ran down my spine. Who were these guys really? That night I couldn't sleep. I decided to wait until morning, go to work as usual, and then have a direct conversation with them in the evening. But something inside told me there was no time. At 3 in the morning, I heard the front door open. They had returned from the bar earlier than usual. I pretended to be asleep, but through the crack of my half-open bedroom door, I could see them in the living room. They were speaking in whispers, but fragments of words reached me. Tomorrow night, then get rid of. No one will know. The next morning I went to work as usual, but instead of returning home, I drove to the police station. The officer listened to my story, but didn't seem very convinced. Without evidence of a crime, there's not much we can do, he said. If you allowed them to stay, technically they're not trespassers. We can send a patrol, but I realized I couldn't count on the police. Returning home, I started planning. I sent a message to my neighbor on the first floor, Carl, explaining the situation and asking permission to spend the night at his place. Then I packed my most essential belongings in a backpack and hid it behind the couch. That night, I told the guys I was going to a corporate party and would be back late. Celebrate without me, I said, trying to sound casual. Instead, I went to Carl's, and we watched my apartment from his window. Around midnight, I noticed 2 more people I had never seen before entering my apartment. One of them was carrying a large gym bag. I called emergency services. There are strangers in my apartment. They might be armed, I said, trying to sound as calm as possible. This time, the police responded quickly. 4 patrol cars arrived within 10 minutes. When the officers burst into the apartment, David and Marcus tried to escape via the fire exit, but were detained. In that gym bag, they found surgical gloves, plastic zip ties, duct tape, several syringes filled with some liquid, and most frightening of all, detailed records of my schedule, my habits, and contacts. They were planning something terrible, and I was their target. As it turned out later, David and Marcus weren't even their real names. They were part of a criminal group involved in identity theft and extortion. They had never been my real college friends. They just used information from social media to gain my trust. Now, 3 years after those events, I live in a different city, in a house with a reliable security system. I've become much more cautious in my interactions and never take people at face value. Sometimes I wake up at night, look at my grandfather's watch that the police returned to me, and think about how close I came to being just a name in police reports. But what scares me the most is the thought that I invited these people into my life myself. So be careful who you open your door to. Not all strangers remain strangers. Renting an old Victorian beach house in Nantucket for the summer felt like stepping into another world. The house, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, was exactly what I had dreamed of, a perfect escape from the chaos of my life in Boston. It had its own charm with weathered shingles, creaking wooden floors, and the scent of salt and hydrangeas wafting through the open windows. Days passed in a peaceful rhythm, each filled with long walks along the shoreline, quiet evenings with a good book, and the simple joys of solitude as the waves crashed against the rocks below. But as days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was something hidden beneath the surface of this idyllic retreat. Soon enough, I would discover what it was. I first noticed the door in the attic 3 days after moving in. I was organizing my art supplies there, arranging canvases and paints in the dim light that filtered through a small round window. The attic spanned the entire length of the house, with exposed beams and that distinctive smell of old wood and dust that seemed suspended in the air. It was a place that felt like it was keeping secrets, and soon I found one of them. The door was small, almost concealed in the shadows at the far end of the attic. It was made of heavy oak, with an antique brass handle that gleamed dully in the weak light. Intrigued, I tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't turn. The door was locked. When I asked the property manager about it the next day, her response was curt. "That room is off limits," she said, her New England accent more pronounced than usual, her voice leaving no room for argument. "It's not included in the rental agreement. Just leave it be." Her answer only intensified my curiosity. What could possibly be in that room? I couldn't stop thinking about it. Each time I climbed up to the attic to paint, my eyes would drift to the door, my mind running through countless possibilities. What could she be hiding? One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, I found a key. It was hidden beneath the liner of an old hutch drawer, as if someone had deliberately tucked it away there. The moment I saw it, I knew what it was for. The temptation was too strong to resist. My heart raced as I took the key and climbed the 2 flights of stairs to the attic. The old steps groaned under my feet as if warning me to turn back. I hesitated before the door, the key cold in my hand. Part of me understood I should leave it alone and respect the property manager's wishes, but my curiosity won out. I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a room that was entirely different from the rest of the house. It was immaculately clean, in stark contrast to the dusty attic. The air was cool and still, as if the room had been sealed off from the world for many years. Everything was meticulously organized. A small writing desk with a chair, shelves filled with old leather-bound journals and trinkets, a large chest against the far wall. But what caught my attention were the recordings. They were everywhere. On the walls, on the shelves, even on the floor, dozens of them, all labeled with dates and times, neatly arranged in chronological order. And all of them had my name on them. A chill ran down my spine as I approached. My eyes scanned the labels, which were written in a neat, precise handwriting. Sarah walking on the beach, Sarah reading on the porch, Sarah painting in the attic. Some seemed recent, others appeared to have been recorded at the moment when. The more I looked, the more unsettled I felt. Who could have made these recordings? How had I not noticed someone watching me? My breathing quickened when I realized that some of the recordings were labeled as being from inside the house. There were entries for Sarah cooking in the kitchen, Sarah relaxing in the living room, even Sarah sleeping in the master bedroom. The The thought made my skin crawl, almost as if the recorder had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to capture me at my most vulnerable. I couldn't bear it anymore. I backed away, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it and hurried downstairs. The key felt heavy in my pocket as I hid it back in the drawer where I'd found it, as if returning it to its hiding place might somehow erase what I had seen that night. I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows made me jump. I kept waiting to hear footsteps in the hallway, the sound of someone moving through the house. But the night passed in silence, the house as quiet as ever. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe the recordings were left by a previous tenant, someone with an unusual hobby. Perhaps the property manager didn't even know about them. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. When I finally gathered the courage to return to the attic, the door to the hidden room was just as I had left it. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the key, debating whether to go back inside. Part of me wanted to leave it, to pretend I had never found it. But I needed to know. I opened the door, and my breath caught in my throat. The room was exactly the same as before, except for one horrifying detail. The recordings had been replaced. The new ones were digital voice recorders, their red recording lights blinking steadily, and they were all labeled with yesterday's date. My heart pounded in my chest as I picked one up and pressed play. The sound that came out was crystal clear, my own voice, singing softly to myself as I painted in the attic, a habit I wasn't even aware I had. Another recorder captured the sound of my breathing as I slept. The recordings were intimate, invasive, capturing moments I thought were private. The realization hit me like a wave of ice water. Someone had been in this house with me all along, someone who had observed my every move, my every private moment. I backed away, nearly tripping over the threshold as I fled from the room. The key slipped from my fingers and clattered loudly on the floor, but I didn't care. I rushed downstairs, my head spinning with fear. I had to get out of there. Within the hour, I was packing my things and loading them into my car, determined to put as many miles between myself and that house as possible. I didn't tell the property manager why I was leaving early, didn't even ask for a refund. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there another night. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone watching me from one of the windows. But the house remained still and silent, its secrets hidden behind its charming facade. It was only when I reached the main road that I noticed something on the passenger seat beside me. A small voice recorder I'd never seen before. With trembling fingers, I pressed play and heard the property manager's voice, clear as day. She found the room. We'll try again with the next one. I never found out who made those recordings or why they were there, but the memory of that room and the feeling of being watched stayed with me long after I left. I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes doors are better left locked. My life at Horizon Publishing had fallen into a comfortable routine. I'd been editing manuscripts at the same small press for nearly 7 years, tucked away in the corner office of our converted Victorian building in downtown Portland. The rain-streaked windows, creaking hardwood floors, and my collection of antique fountain pens made my workspace feel more like a writer's sanctuary than a corporate desk. I had no reason to feel uneasy there until the notes began appearing. It was a foggy Tuesday morning in late autumn when I found the first one. I had just settled in with my thermos of chai tea and was reaching for my red editing pen when I noticed something unusual tucked between the pages of the manuscript I was working on. I carefully extracted a small folded piece of parchment paper with my name written in elegant calligraphy. At first, I thought it might be an invitation to one of those literary events our publishing house occasionally hosted. But as I unfolded the note, a chill ran down my spine. The message was brief but unsettling. "I know what haunts you at 3 in the morning." My mind began racing. What could this mean? I'd been struggling with insomnia for months, often waking at exactly 3 a.m., but I'd never mentioned this to anyone at work. I laughed nervously, dismissing it as a strange coincidence, or perhaps a misguided attempt at a literary joke from one of our more eccentric authors. I crumpled the note and tossed it into my recycling bin, determined to forget about it. But the notes continued to appear. Every few days, I'd discover a new one waiting for me. They materialized in impossible places, sealed inside advance reader copies that hadn't been opened yet, pressed between the glass and frame of my diploma. Or once, terrifyingly, as a bookmark in the novel I'd been reading at home the night before and had brought to work that morning. Each note was more personal, containing details no one should have known, childhood memories I'd never shared, private thoughts I'd only expressed in my journal, even specific nightmares that had plagued me recently. The handwriting was always the same, flowing, slightly tilted, and completely unfamiliar to me. The messages grew increasingly disturbing, hinting at my deepest insecurities, my most profound fears, and always ending with cryptic, chilling phrases like, "I'm woven into the fabric of your life," or "the pages of your story are mine to turn." By the 5th note, I was becoming paranoid. I found myself scanning the office, watching for anyone who might be observing me or slipping away from my desk, but nothing seemed out of place. Everyone continued with their daily tasks, oblivious to my growing anxiety. Inside, I was unraveling. The historic building, once charming with its creaking floors and hidden nooks, now felt like a labyrinth of watching eyes and listening ears. I confided in my colleague Marco, the senior fiction editor whose office adjoined mine through an old servant's passage. I hoped he might offer some logical explanation or advice. He listened attentively, his expression growing serious behind his vintage tortoiseshell glasses. "Are you certain this isn't research for one of our psychological thrillers?" he asked, trying to inject some levity. But the concern in his eyes betrayed his true feelings. "Perhaps you should speak with Eliza in HR," he suggested. And so I did. I approached HR, feeling somewhat foolish, but desperate to regain control of the situation. Eliza, our head of human resources, a formidable woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, listened to my concerns with an impassive expression. She assured me they would investigate the matter thoroughly and asked if I had any suspicions about who might be behind this. But I was at a loss. I had no enemies at horizon, no one who would go to such lengths to fright me. Days passed after my conversation with HR, and I received no updates or explanations. I began to feel disconnected from reality. Each time I opened a manuscript or picked up a book, my heart would race, anticipating another note. But for a while, there were none. Just as I was beginning to convince myself that it was over, that perhaps HR had quietly resolved the issue, the notes returned. This time they were worse. The messages were no longer merely mysterious. They had become explicitly threatening. One note simply read, "I know when your light goes out at night," and another, "The lock on your back door is surprisingly easy to pick." The final blow came on a Thursday evening during a thunderstorm that had knocked out power to half the building. It had been a long, tense week, and I was exhausted. As I sat at my desk, trying to focus on editing by the light of an old brass lamp running on a generator, I pulled open my drawer to retrieve a flash drive and found another note. My breath caught as I read it. "I'm watching you breathe right now." Those words triggered a surge of fear, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. A sudden pressure constricted my chest, as if invisible hands were squeezing my lungs. My hands trembled as I clutched the note. My mind raced frantically. The office suddenly seemed suffocating, the air thick with dread. I felt a gaze upon me, heavy and persistent. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slowly turned, expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. But the dimly lit office appeared empty. The usual sounds of keyboards clicking and coffee machines brewing had given way to an eerie silence, punctuated only by the occasional rumble of thunder and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows. It was late, and most of my colleagues had already left for the day. The antique chandelier in the hallway cast elongated shadows across the walls, transforming familiar spaces into something sinister. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and began to move around my desk, carefully examining every corner of the office. I checked behind the vintage bookshelves, peered into the darkened conference room, even looked under desks, but I found no one. The feeling of being observed didn't subside, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness, but I couldn't locate its source. My rational mind insisted it was merely imagination, fueled by the paranoia these notes had cultivated. But a deeper, primal instinct told me otherwise. Unable to shake the fear, I gathered my belongings and hurried to leave the building. I didn't look back, afraid of what I might or might not see if I did. That weekend, I barely slept, haunted by the thought that someone out there knew me, knew my fears, and was playing an elaborate game with my sanity. When Monday arrived, I dreaded returning to work. When I arrived, my office was exactly as I had left it, or so it seemed. I hesitantly opened my drawer, my heart constricting in my chest, but there was no new note, no sign that anything had been disturbed. For a brief moment, I felt relief, until I noticed something else. The note from Thursday was gone. The one that had said, "I'm watching you breathe right now." I had left it in my drawer, but now it had vanished. Someone had taken it. A glacial horror settled in my stomach. Whoever was doing this was closer than I could have imagined. I returned to HR, demanding answers, but Eliza seemed more irritated than concerned. "We've checked the security cameras," she said curtly. "No one has been tampering with your things. Are you sure you haven't misplaced these notes yourself?" Her words stung, and I left her office feeling even more isolated. The notes stopped after that, but the fear remained. I could no longer concentrate on my work, always feeling on edge, always looking over my shoulder. I never discovered who was behind those notes, or how they knew such intimate details about my life. But the experience left a permanent mark, a persistent uncertainty I could never quite shake. 3 months later, I received a promotion to senior editor, which came with an unexpected benefit: a move to our new satellite office in a modern building across town. I accepted immediately, hoping the change of environment would help me leave the nightmare behind. On my first day at the new office, I found my sleek, minimalist desk bathed in natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows. No creaking floors or shadowy corners here. As I arranged my belongings, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Maybe now I could finally move on. That feeling lasted until I opened my laptop. There, set as my desktop background, was a photograph I'd never seen before, a picture of me, asleep in my bed, taken just the night before. In the corner of the image, written in that now familiar, elegant handwriting, "New surroundings won't change our story. I'll always be watching." Even now, years later in a different city, with a different career, I still catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me from the shadows. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if they're watching me still. And sometimes, in moments even darker, I wonder if they were ever really there at all. While sorting through old memorabilia in the basement of my newly inherited Victorian home in coastal Maine, I heard the sound of someone moving upstairs. A soft creak of floorboards, a faint rustle of footsteps. My heart froze, and I became perfectly still, listening intently. The footsteps were deliberate, not like the random settling of an old house built in 1872, but the distinct gait of someone walking through the rooms. I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator that there was an intruder in my house. She instructed me to stay on the line and remain silent until the police arrived. I could still hear the footsteps above, moving from the kitchen to the living room, then toward the staircase. My mind raced as I concealed myself behind a stack of sea chests that once belonged to my great-uncle, a retired lighthouse keeper, praying that whoever was upstairs wouldn't descend into the basement. Minutes stretched like hours, the tension in the air so thick you could taste the salt and fear mixed together. Finally, I heard the sound of a vehicle approaching on the gravel driveway, followed by car doors slamming. The police had arrived. Relief washed over me, but strangely, the footsteps continued, seemingly oblivious to the arrival of law enforcement. I remained hidden until I heard officers calling out, announcing their presence. Only then did I emerge from the basement, my hands trembling as I climbed the worn wooden stairs to meet them. The officers methodically checked every room of the house, attic to cellar, but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been inside. They examined the windows and doors, just as I had done when I first arrived 3 weeks ago, and everything was secure. They even reviewed the footage from the surveillance cameras I had installed around the property after the first incident, but the video showed nothing. No one entering or exiting, no shadowy figures creeping through hallways, nothing disturbing the thick fog that had rolled in from the Atlantic that evening. It was as if the sounds I heard existed only in my imagination. But I knew better. I had heard those footsteps, felt the presence of someone or something moving through my ancestral home, the same home where my grandmother had once whispered about the others who walked these halls. The officers tried to reassure me, suggesting that it might simply be the house settling on its ancient foundation, or perhaps a raccoon or fox outside that I had mistaken for an intruder. But I saw the doubt in their eyes. They thought I was just overwhelmed, that perhaps I was too anxious about living alone in an unfamiliar place, with only the lighthouse beam sweeping across my windows every 37 seconds. After the police left, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself that maybe they were right. Maybe I was just imagining things, but deep down I knew better. Something was wrong with the house, something I couldn't explain. The alarm continued to go off, always at 3:17 in the morning, and each time it happened, I felt that same cold dread creeping up my spine like the tide coming in. After several nights, I decided to stay awake and watch the surveillance footage in real time, determined to figure out what was triggering the alarm. I sat in front of the monitor, the house dark and silent around me, the only light coming from the screen and the distant lighthouse beam that cut through my kitchen window every half minute. 3:17 came and went, and for a moment I thought perhaps the disturbances had ceased. But then the alarm shrieked, piercing through the silence like a foghorn in the dead of night. I quickly rewound the recording, my eyes scanning the screen for any signs of movement. There was nothing. No intruder, no animals, nothing that could have triggered the alarm. But listening more carefully, I heard something that made my heart stand still. Faint, almost imperceptible footsteps, muffled, distant, but undeniably human, or at least they had once been human. They were on the recording, but when I played it for others, the local sheriff who had known my family for generations, the tech specialist from the security company, even the town historian who was intrigued by my story, they heard nothing. It was as if these sounds were meant only for me, a descendant of the original lighthouse keeper who had built this house after 3 sailors were lost in the fog. The days that followed became a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I became obsessed with the alarm and the footsteps, spending hours reviewing the recordings, trying to find even the slightest anomaly. But no matter what I did, the result was always the same, nothing visible, just those faint, ghostly footsteps echoing through the house, always followed by the smell of seawater and wet wool. I began to avoid going to sleep, dreading the moment when the alarm would trigger again. I lay awake, listening, waiting for the footsteps to begin. Sometimes I thought I could hear whispers, just at the edge of audibility, as if someone was trying to speak to me from the other side of the walls. But the words were always just beyond reach, leaving me with an ever-growing sense of unease, and the feeling that something was trying to show me something hidden beneath the floorboards of the main hallway. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left the house, staying with a friend in town while I tried to figure out what to do next. I couldn't live like this, constantly on edge, feeling watched, haunted by something I couldn't see, but that seemed to know exactly who I was and why I had returned to this coastal property after so many years away. I called in another technician, another police visit, but nothing helped. The alarm continued to malfunction. The footsteps continued to echo on the recordings. and I knew that whatever was in the house wasn't going to leave me in peace until I addressed what had happened in that house during the winter of 1913. The last night I spent in that house, the alarm went off at 3:17, as always, but this time when I listened to the recording, the footsteps were louder, clearer, as if they were right beside me. And this time I heard something else. A low, rough whisper, just 2 words, but it was enough to send me fleeing into the night, leaving behind the house and the secret buried beneath it. Find us. It wasn't until weeks later, when I finally gathered the courage to return with a local diver who specialized in recovering lost items from the sea, that we discovered what the spirits had been trying to tell me. Beneath the house, accessed through a forgotten trapdoor in the hallway, was a hidden chamber where 3 sailors had been imprisoned by my great uncle, the lighthouse keeper, who had deliberately extinguished the light on that foggy night so many years ago. Now I live in an apartment in the city, far from the coast in that house. But sometimes, at exactly 3:17 in the morning, my phone alarm goes off by itself. And each time, I hear those same footsteps, followed by those same 2 words, reminding me that some debts can never truly be settled, and some stories never truly end. It was just a regular Friday night in New Orleans, the kind where the humid summer air clings to your skin as you stroll through the French Quarter with friends. We'd spent the evening at Mason Creole, our favorite spot for jambalaya and jazz, before heading to a hidden speakeasy down a cobblestone alley. The bartender, an older man with stories etched into the lines of his face, mixed drinks that tasted like liquid poetry, while saxophone notes floated through the dimly lit space. Laughter, stories about our college days, that easy camaraderie that comes from friendships spanning decades. It all made the night feel magical. One of those perfect evenings that leaves you smiling long after it ends. I remember checking my watch at 2 in the morning, surprised at how quickly time had passed, before we all hugged goodbye and scattered into Ubers, heading in different directions. But that happiness shattered the moment I reached for my wallet the next afternoon and discovered it was gone. At first, I thought I just misplaced it in my post-nightcap haze. I retraced my steps throughout my Victorian apartment, checking every pocket, every corner, every possible place it might have fallen. I called both establishments, hoping someone had found it and turned it in, but no luck. As Sunday crawled by, the sinking feeling settled in my stomach that my wallet was gone for good, and I had no choice but to report the theft. I canceled my credit cards, filed a police report with an officer who seemed more interested in his coffee than my case, and began the tedious process of replacing my identification. It was frustrating, but what truly unsettled me was the thought that someone now had access to my personal information, someone who could use it however they pleased. 3 days later, as I was heading out to meet my editor, I work as a freelance photojournalist, I noticed a weathered leather journal wedged between my front door and the antique brass knocker. No markings, no return address, just a plain, worn journal with my name scrawled in a jagged hand across the cover. Puzzled, I took it down and opened it. Inside, nestled between the empty pages, was my wallet. For one brief moment, relief washed over me, until I opened it and saw that all its contents had been removed. My credit cards, ID, the $300 cash I'd withdrawn for the weekend. Even the faded photograph of my grandfather I'd carried since childhood, all gone, replaced by a single sheet of paper hidden in one of the card compartments. I pulled it out, and my heart stopped as I read the words written in bold, red ink. "I know where the bodies are buried." A cold tremor ran up my spine, and my hand shook as I held the note. The words were simple, yet filled with a threatening certainty that froze my blood. Someone had gone to the trouble of stealing my wallet, emptying its contents, and then returning it to me with this chilling message. Whoever it was knew where I lived, had been at my home, close enough to wedge the journal into my door without being noticed. Fear gripped me as I stared at the note, my mind racing with questions. Who did this? Why return the wallet? What bodies? What did they want? Despite all my efforts, I couldn't piece it together, couldn't make sense of what was happening. I only knew one thing. I was no longer safe in my own home. The next few days passed in a fog of paranoia and anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched, that someone was lurking in the shadows of the century-old oak trees that line my street, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every creak of the hardwood floors, every rustle of the Spanish moss outside my window made my heart race. I barely slept, jumping at every small sound, convinced someone was trying to break in. I decided to take action. The first thing I did was change the locks on the doors. The thought that someone might have a key to my apartment filled me with dread, so I called a locksmith immediately. I watched as he installed new deadbolts, checking twice to make sure everything was secure. But even this didn't entirely calm my fears. The next step was moving some of my belongings to my friend Marcus's place in the Garden District. I didn't have the time or ability to completely relocate, but I thought if I made it look like I wasn't living there consistently, it might deter whoever was watching me. I packed clothes, important documents, and everything of value, and spent several nights on Marcus's leather sectional. But the fear didn't leave me. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched, even when I was miles from home. I also installed a security system with cameras, motion sensors, and an alarm that would alert both me and the local police station. The company assured me my apartment was now one of the most secure in the city, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease every time I walked through the door. I reviewed the camera footage obsessively, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever had left that note, but nothing appeared. It was as if this person had simply vanished, leaving me in a state of perpetual fear. Days turned into weeks, and gradually the intensity of my fears began to diminish, though they never completely disappeared. I started to restore some semblance of normal rhythm, though I remained extremely vigilant. I avoided going out late at night, kept the curtains drawn, and checked the locks multiple times before going to bed. But memories of that note haunted me, a reminder that someone had invaded my life in the most personal way. I became obsessed with finding who did this. I went over every detail of that evening with friends, trying to recall if anyone had been acting strangely, if I'd noticed anyone following us, but nothing stood out. I even considered the possibility that it was some sick practical joke, but the note didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a threat, one I couldn't ignore. One morning, about 5 weeks after finding the journal, I was sitting at my kitchen table editing photos when my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. "Hello," I said, hearing nothing but silence on the other end. After what felt like an eternity, a voice spoke, distorted, as if through some kind of modifier. "Check the cemetery on Prytania Street. Plot 17. Bring your camera." The line went dead before I could respond. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. Lafayette Cemetery on Prytania Street was one of the oldest in the city, famous for its above-ground tombs and winding paths. I'd photographed it countless times for travel magazines, capturing the haunting beauty of the stone angels and weathered crosses. I knew I should call the police, but what would I tell them? That I received a cryptic phone call about a cemetery. That weeks ago, someone returned my stolen wallet with a strange note. They'd think I was paranoid or seeking attention. And deep down, despite my fear, curiosity burned within me. What would I find at Plot 17? That afternoon, heart-pounding, I made my way to the cemetery, camera in hand. The iron gates creaked as I pushed them open, stepping into the labyrinth of tombs and mausoleums. The air felt heavy with humidity and history as I navigated the narrow pathways, searching for Plot 17. I found it tucked in a forgotten corner, a simple stone marker partially obscured by overgrown vines. As I brushed away the greenery, my blood ran cold. Carved into the stone was a familiar name, my own, and below it a fresh bouquet of black roses. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my camera. This couldn't be real. Someone was playing an elaborate, twisted game with me. As I raised my camera with shaking hands to document this macabre discovery, I noticed something tucked between the flowers, a small, weathered photograph. I picked it up carefully. It showed a group of 5 people standing in front of a lake house I didn't recognize. 4 faces I'd never seen before, and one I knew all too well, my own grandfather, decades younger than I'd ever known him. On the back, written in the same jagged handwriting as the note in my wallet, "Some secrets stay buried. Others come back to haunt us. Your grandfather knew this. Now you do too." Months have passed since that day at the cemetery, and although the fear no longer consumes me, it has left its mark. I've become more cautious, more attentive to what happens around me, and less trusting of others. The feeling of being watched never quite leaves me, sitting in my mind like a shadow. I've been researching my grandfather's past, discovering connections to people and places I never knew existed, piecing together a history that seems increasingly tangled with my present. I know I need to move forward, but part of me will always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if that anonymous threat will ever materialize, wondering what secrets my family has kept buried, wondering if I'll ever learn the whole truth. In the end, I still don't know who did this, but I'm beginning to understand why. The first message arrived on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk in the back corner of the Open Plan startup office in Seattle, finishing up some code before our weekly progress meeting, when my phone vibrated against the wooden surface. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another spam text about an extended car warranty. But something made me pause. I opened it, expecting the usual nonsense, but what I read made my skin crawl. "That vintage band shirt looks great on you today. The faded red really brings out your eyes." I frowned, looking down at my worn Red Hot Chili Peppers concert tee. It wasn't an unusual choice of clothing for our casual tech workspace, and it could have been coincidence, but something about the message felt off. How could this person know what I was wearing? I scanned the office, trying to spot anyone acting suspicious, but everyone was absorbed in their screens or huddled in small discussion groups by the whiteboard wall. I dismissed it, thinking it must be some strange prank from a coworker, and went back to debugging my section of the app. But the messages didn't stop. Over the next several days, new texts arrived, each one increasingly disturbing. They described my habits, places I'd visited, and even conversations I'd had. One morning, as I was walking to work, I received a message that read, "Did you enjoy that pour-over at Emerald City Coffee? The barista with the septum piercing gave you an extra shot because she thinks you're cute." I stopped dead in my tracks on the rain-slicked sidewalk. I had indeed stopped at that coffee shop that morning, and the barista with the nose ring had given me a free extra shot, smiling in a way that seemed flirtatious. My heart raced as I reread the message. How could they possibly know this? I hadn't told anyone. At first, I tried to dismiss it as an elaborate prank. Maybe a friend who happened to be at the same coffee shop, or someone from the office keeping tabs on me. But over time, the messages became more specific, more intimately personal. They began predicting things that would happen to me, small accidents, minor mishaps that, while not life-threatening, were definitely unsettling. One evening in early October, as I was leaving my apartment building for a dinner date, I received a text. "Watch out for the broken pavement by the bus stop. In those new shoes, you might twist your ankle." I froze with my hand on the door handle of my building. There was indeed uneven pavement by the bus stop that I passed every day, but I'd never had any trouble with it before. And how did they know about my new shoes? I just bought them during my lunch break and hadn't shown them to anyone. I shook my head, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as I walked past the bus stop, distracted by thoughts of the text, my foot caught on a chunk of broken concrete that seemed more pronounced than I remembered. I stumbled, catching myself against a street lamp, heart pounding as the words from the text echoed in my mind. I decided to take action. I tried tracing the number, but every attempt led nowhere. It was as if the number didn't exist, a ghost in the system. I filed a report with the police, but without any explicit threat, they couldn't do much. They advised changing my number, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted to know who was behind this. The idea that someone was watching me, knowing so much about my life, terrified me. But I also needed answers. The messages continued to arrive, each one a reminder that someone was out there, watching me. "You're running late today, maybe skip coffee and take the earlier light rail train." The text accurately predicted delays, weather changes, and even the arrival of a package I wasn't expecting. My tech background made me consider all sorts of possibilities. Surveillance software on my phone, cameras in my apartment, even some kind of experimental AI that could somehow predict human behavior. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. How could anyone know so much, predict these things with such accuracy? I started to withdraw, avoiding my usual routines, hoping to throw off whoever was watching me. I changed my route to work, stopped going to my favorite places, even began taking different paths home. But the texts followed me, commenting on my new routines, almost as if mocking my attempts to escape. Nice try with the detour through Pioneer Square, but I still see you. The historical architecture is beautiful this time of year, isn't it? Sleep became elusive. Every time my phone chimed, my heart would race, and I dread what I might read. The constant anxiety was exhausting, and I began to jump at shadows, seeing threats where there were none. I even thought about leaving the city for a while, heading to my parents' place in eastern Washington. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was sending these messages would find me wherever I went. Then, as suddenly as they began, the messages stopped. I noticed it one day when I realized I hadn't received any texts for more than 24 hours. At first, I felt relief, thinking that maybe it was finally over, but the relief quickly turned to anxiety. Why had they stopped? Had they moved on to someone else? Or was this part of some larger plan? Days turned into weeks, and still no messages. I began to relax, though the memory of those weeks of torment remained. Yet the silence became even worse than the texts themselves. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next message, the next sign that someone was still watching me, but there was nothing. As weeks went by, I tried to return to normal life, but the knowledge that someone had known so much about me, predicted so many of my movements, weighed heavily on me. I became more cautious, more guarded, not just with my routines, but with the people around me. I installed security cameras in my apartment, routinely checked for tracking software on my devices, and even considered changing jobs to work remotely from a different city. This experience had shaken me to my core, leaving a scar that time couldn't fully heal. When friends asked why I seemed different, why I always preferred to meet in new places rather than our usual haunts, I brushed it off as wanting more variety in my life. How could I explain that I felt hunted in a city I once loved? One night, months after it had all ended, I sat alone in my apartment, the memories of the messages distant, but still present shadows in my mind. Outside, the November rain pattered against my windows, creating streaks of light from the street lamps below. My phone vibrated on the coffee table, and I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, that familiar dread washing over me again. But when I picked up the phone, it was just a message from a friend, nothing more. I exhaled, trying to calm my racing heart. But as I set the phone down, one thought remained with me, chilling me to the bone. Somewhere out there, someone still knew too much about me. I was about to put my phone on silent when it vibrated once more, this time from an unknown number. My fingers trembled as I opened the message. "I've missed our conversations. Did you think I was gone for good? I was just watching you adjust, waiting for the right moment. By the way, that new security system you installed last week, it has a blind spot by your kitchen window. You might want to fix that before someone exploits it. Sweet dreams." The phone slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor. I stared at my kitchen window, curtains half drawn, and for just a moment, though it might have been my imagination, I thought I saw a shadow move across the fire escape outside. When I first moved to Pinewood Heights, I was ecstatic. The tree-lined streets with their Victorian-era houses, manicured lawns, and friendly faces created the sense of a perfect place for a fresh start. It was summer of 1987, and I had just landed my dream job at the local radio station. My small cottage at the end of Maple Lane was cozy and charming, and I quickly settled into a comfortable routine. The neighbors were welcoming, especially the man who lived next door. He introduced himself as Raymond, a middle-aged gentleman with a warm smile and seemingly genuine interest in helping me settle into the neighborhood. At first, I appreciated Raymond's friendliness. He offered to help with yard work, invited me over for barbecues, and gave advice about local services. It was nice having someone willing to help, especially when you're new to a place. We would occasionally chat over the fence, and he always seemed interested in learning more about me. Where I worked, my hobbies, even about my family background. I found his curiosity a bit excessive, but dismissed it as harmless, neighborly interest. However, over time, Raymond's behavior began to shift from friendly to disturbing. He started asking increasingly personal questions. He wanted to know details of my work schedule, the names of my friends, and even why I wasn't dating anyone. His questions were intrusive, and I began feeling uncomfortable with how much he wanted to know about my life. There was something about the way he asked, an intensity in his gaze that made me feel uneasy. I tried to distance myself, making excuses when he invited me over or attempted to engage in lengthy conversations. But Raymond was persistent. He always seemed to be outside when I left for work or returned home, waving and calling out to me as if he'd been watching for my comings and goings. The feeling that he was always there, always watching, became harder to shake. Then one day, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was on a Sunday morning, as I was tidying up my front yard, rearranging some flower pots that sat on the steps. As I bent down to move one of the pots, something metallic caught my eye. Hidden among the leaves was a small black object. I picked it up, and my heart froze when I realized what it was: a miniature camera. A small, unobtrusive device, perfectly positioned to capture everything happening at my front door. My body trembled as I held the camera, a sense of violation washing over me. Someone had been watching me, recording my every move as I entered and left my home. The feeling of security I once had in my space was shattered instantly. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Raymond's strange behavior, his obsession with my routines, it all pointed to him. But why? What did he hope to gain by violating my privacy like this? Questions swirled in my head, each becoming more disturbing than the last. Taking a deep breath, I decided I couldn't ignore this. I needed answers. I walked over to Raymond's house, holding the camera in my hand, and knocked on his door. When he opened it, his expression shifted from surprise to something else, something I couldn't quite place. "I found this," I said, holding up the camera. It was hidden behind a flower pot in my yard. "Care to explain?" For a moment, Raymond's face went blank, as if he was processing the situation, and then he let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, that's just for security. Can't be too careful these days, right?" I stared at him, unfathomable outrage and anger boiling inside me. "Security? You've been spying on me. This isn't normal, Raymond." This is unacceptable. Raymond's smile faded, and his eyes became pleading. I didn't mean to upset you. I was just trying to look out for you. You're new here, and I thought it would be good to keep an eye on things, in case something happened. His words did little to appease my indignation. If anything, they only made me feel more uncomfortable. This wasn't about security, it was about control. He wanted to know everything about me, monitor my every move, and I couldn't tolerate it. I don't like this, I said firmly. You had no right to place a camera on my property without my consent. I want you to remove any other cameras you might have installed and leave me alone. Do you understand? Raymond's face darkened, and for a moment I saw a flash of something cold in his eyes, but then he nodded, and his expression became friendly again, almost apologetic. Of course, sorry, I'll remove the camera. It won't happen again. I didn't trust him. Something about his quick change in demeanor seemed fake, as if he was just saying what I wanted to hear. But I had made my point, and I hoped that would be the end of it. The next few days, I kept a close eye on my surroundings, wary of any sign that Raymond was still watching me. I checked my yard, windows, and even the inside of my house for more cameras, but found nothing suspicious. For a while, everything seemed to go back to normal. Raymond kept his distance, only giving a polite nod when our paths crossed, and I started to think that perhaps he had genuinely understood that his behavior was inappropriate. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a much darker turn of events. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, my landline phone rang. I picked it up, expecting it to be my sister, who often called around this time. But when I answered, there was only silence. Hello, I repeated, thinking it might be a bad connection. Still nothing, just the faint sound of breathing on the other end. After a few seconds, I hung up, assuming it was a wrong number or perhaps someone playing a prank. But the calls continued. Every night around the same time, the phone would ring, and when I answered, there would be nothing but that eerie silence followed by the sound of breathing. I started to let it ring, hoping whoever it was would give up, but they were persistent. The calls came like clockwork, and with each one, a growing sense of unease settled over me. I tried to trace the number, but it always showed up as unknown or private. I considered changing my number, but something held me back, a stubborn part of me that didn't want to be forced out of my own life by some anonymous caller. At work, I mentioned the calls to my colleague, Sarah. We were in the break room of the radio station, the hum of equipment providing a comforting background noise compared to the silence of my home. That's creepy, she said, her eyes darkening with concern. You should report it. It's not normal, especially if the number can't be traced. I agreed, but inside, I was already growing anxious that something much more serious was behind these calls. Her advice was sound, but I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. That night the call came again, and instead of the usual silence on the line, I heard it, slow breathing, as if someone was waiting. My fingers trembled as I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the receiver. Nothing, just the same unknown number. Each call became more oppressive. I felt increasingly isolated, as if every time my phone rang, I was being trapped in a cage I couldn't escape. I felt watched. In my cottage, in the stillness of the night, I constantly looked over my shoulder, searching for movements in the darkness that weren't there, hearing sounds that didn't exist, and each call intensified my sense of danger. I started checking the locks on the doors and windows every time I went to bed. I even left a small lamp on by my bedside to dispel some of the darkness, but it didn't help. Those calls continued, relentless and disturbing. A few days later, I told my friend Kate about it as we sat in a coffee shop. The bustle of the small town, a stark contrast to what I was feeling inside. "That's eerie," she said, her eyes darkening with worry. "You should have this checked out. It's not normal, especially if the number can't be traced." "I've already tried, but it led nowhere," I replied, staring into my cup. "And what if it's just a coincidence? What if it's just someone accidentally dialing my number?" "Don't be naive," she said. "This is something more than just coincidence." I felt my shoulders tense. She was right. What was happening was more than a simple misunderstanding. I couldn't stay in the dark anymore. The feeling of anxiety was growing stronger, and I realized that more action needed to be taken. I had to do something, but what? I considered changing my number. "I've thought about it," I admitted, stirring my coffee, abstractly staring at the cup. "But there's something stopping me. It's like I need to find out who's behind these calls. It's starting to get under my skin." Kate looked at me with concern. "You should be careful. This might just be a prank, but it could also be something more serious." I nodded, but I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't just ignore these calls, not when they were beginning to feel so personal. A knot of worry was growing in my stomach, a feeling that something was very wrong. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the phone in my hands, waiting. The clock struck midnight, and just when I was about to give up and go to sleep, it rang. My heart constricted when I saw the familiar unknown number on the display. I paused for a moment before answering. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling slightly. For several seconds there was nothing, just the usual silence. Then I heard it breathing, slow, steady, and frighteningly close. It sent chills down my spine, my body frozen as I tried to hear anything else. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to maintain composure. "Why are you calling?" The breathing continued, unchanged, as if my questions had no effect. I was about to hang up when I heard something else, a barely audible whisper, too quiet to make out. I brought the phone closer to my ear, my heart beating faster. "What did you say?" I whispered, fear and frustration mingling in my voice. There was a pause, and then the whisper repeated, now louder, clear enough for me to understand. It was my name, Jack. The voice was low, almost hissing, and it sounded so familiar, but I couldn't place from where. My blood ran cold, and I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. The call ended abruptly, the screen going dark as the phone landed on the bed. I sat frozen in place, trying to comprehend what had just happened. How did they know my name? I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if someone had invaded my life and taken something deeply personal. That night I didn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind outside made my nerves jangle. I left the lamp on, but the light did little to dispel the fear that had taken root in my mind. I tried to tell myself that it was just a cruel joke, that someone was playing with me, but deep in my heart, I knew it was more than just a prank. The next day, I went to the local police station. I told them about the calls, the strange noises, and the voice that whispered my name. The officer I spoke with was polite but skeptical. He suggested that it was probably just a prank or a crossed line, and advised me to block the number and change my phone number if it continued. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more than just a prank. I blocked the number as the officer advised, but part of me dreaded the silence that might follow. As disturbing as these calls were, the thought of not knowing who was behind them and why they were calling was far worse. That night, my phone didn't ring. I sat in bed, watching the screen, half expecting it to light up again with that same unknown number, but it remained dark. I should have been relieved, but I was on edge, as if waiting for something to happen. As I was drifting off to sleep, my phone vibrated with a text message. My heart raced as I reached for it, fingers trembling. The message was from an unknown number, but this time, it wasn't the same number as before. The message was brief, just 2 words. "Miss me?" My breath caught. I stared at the screen. The message felt like a taunt, a reminder that whoever was behind the calls wasn't finished with me. I quickly blocked this number too, but it did little to alleviate my fear. The next few nights, I was constantly on alert, every sound making me jump, unable to relax. The calls had stopped, but the uncertainty remained, a constant presence in my mind. I began to wonder if I would ever feel safe again. A week passed without further contact, and I started to think that maybe it was over, that whoever had been terrorizing me had moved on. But the feeling of anxiety never fully left. I kept my phone nearby, waiting for the next call or message, knowing they could come at any moment. And then, just when I had begun to relax a little, my phone rang again. I looked at the screen, my stomach twisting into a knot. The number was unfamiliar, but different from the previous ones. I took a deep breath and answered. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought it was just a dead line. But then I heard my name, whispered by that same familiar voice. "Jack." I immediately hung up, my heart pounding. Whoever this was, they weren't done with me yet. That's when I realized that this wasn't just a random prank. Someone was watching me. Someone who knew my name, my habits, my life, and they weren't going to stop. The calls continued, each more terrifying than the last. I stopped answering, but they still came. Relentless and disturbing. The whispers became more frequent, and the breathing heavier, as if whoever was on the other end was getting closer. I changed my number, but it didn't help. The calls still found me. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted, that someone out there was waiting, watching. I couldn't stay in Pinewood Heights any longer. I packed my essentials and fled to my sister's place in another state, hoping that distance would break whatever connection this stalker had established. For a few weeks, there was blessed silence. No calls, no messages, just peace. I started to believe that perhaps it was tied to the house, to Raymond, and that by leaving, I had escaped. Then one night, as a thunderstorm raged outside my sister's apartment, my new phone rang. The number was unknown. My hands shook as I answered, hoping against hope that it was just a telemarketer or a wrong number. "Hello," I whispered. For a moment there was nothing, and relief began to wash over me. Then I heard it, that familiar breathing, followed by 3 words that sent ice through my veins. "Found you, Jack." The voice was no longer a whisper. It was clear, distinct, and unmistakably Raymond's. In that moment, I knew that no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, he would always find me. This wasn't about spying anymore. It was about possession. And the most terrifying part, I had no idea what he planned to do next. I don't know who they are or what they want, but I know one thing for certain. They won't stop until they get what they're after. And that's the scariest part of all this. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.